Hello everyone and welcome back to Red Room Stories. I know many of you tune into these tales to help you drift off to sleep. So before we settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. It began with the rain, falling like a relentless percussion that painted the rooftops of Westfield with a glossy sheen. For Leah, the rain had always been a comfort, a rhythm to which she could dance her thoughts, but tonight it felt more like a warning. The dark clouds that loomed over the suburban town mirrored the unease gnawing at her gut as she trudged home from her late shift at the diner. Her uneventful life had suddenly grown unsettling, as if secrets lurked behind each droplet, volatile and eager to burst open. Leah quickened her pace, the soft squelching of her shoes echoing unnervingly in the stillness. As she turned onto her street, a palpable tension rose in the air, heavier than the mist that curled around her ankles. An odd sensation washed over her, as if the neighborhood she had known for years had transformed overnight into a foreign land, one mapped by shadows. There it was. The hollow, haunting emptiness of her house now seemed vast, as though it had expanded under the oppressive darkness. Her mother had always insisted that the walls absorbed memories, but Leah sensed that something more sinister had taken root within the confines of their home. Inside, the air felt cold, sharp against her skin, as she shed her damp coat and called out to the silence. The kitchen, where they once shared laughter and late-night snacks, now lay illuminated by a flickering fluorescent bulb, its hum unsettlingly rhythmic. She wandered through the dim corridors, the familiar creaks and groans taking on dimensions of dread. In the silence, whispers began to creep into her consciousness, flickering at the edges of her mind, teasing her with their incoherent murmurs. It was a spectral song, a haunting melody that thrummed through the very structure of her being. Days slipped by in a haze, time slipping through her fingers like water, losing form and shape. The whispers grew louder, feeding on her isolation, gnawing at her sanity. When she attempted to reach out to others, the words felt locked behind her lips, constricted by invisible hands. The townsfolk, her former friends, had begun to watch her with a blend of pity and fear, eyes full of unspoken words that resonated like echoes in a cavern. They wouldn't speak her name in passing anymore, as if invoking her presence would summon whatever darkness seemed to cling to her like a shroud. One night, compelled by an instinct she couldn't name, Leah ventured into the woods beyond the edge of town, where tangled branches reached out like skeletal fingers. The air turned still, the kind of stillness that makes the world hold its breath. The deeper she walked, the less it felt like she was navigating through trees and dirt, and more like she was wading through a heavy fog that seemed to sing her name. Each rustle in the underbrush sent chills racing down her spine as she approached, a clearing, illuminated by an unnatural glow that pulsed rhythmically. In the center of the clearing stood an altar made of twisted roots and bones, the stench of decay clinging thickly to the air, sharp and sour. Leah felt her heart pound against the chastisement of her mind as shadows danced around her, morphing and twisting in ways that defied logic. Yet she was drawn to the sickly light, an ancient yearning bubbling to the surface within her. Atop the altar lay a mirror, its surface slick and rippling, reflecting not her own visage but a distorted version of herself, swirling, weeping, grinning, and anguished faces writhing in agony. As she peered deeper into the mirror, Leah felt their pain, their fear penetrating the veil of her selfhood. They were her ancestors, the architects of her own echoing sorrow, and she saw with stark clarity the choices they had made, the shadows they had fostered. Each face looked back at her, silently demanding redemption for their transgressions. The whispers in her mind crescendoed, now entwined with the wails of the lost, a cacophony of desperate spirits seeking solace in the darkest corners of her soul. Fumbling back, she stumbled away from the altar, heart racing as terror took root within her, molding her thoughts into frantic spirals of doubt. Bursting from the woods, she ran toward the town, but the streets transformed before her eyes. Familiar buildings melted into grotesque parodies of what they once were. The diner became a grotesque maw, and the main street twisted into serpentine paths of despair. Faces flashed by, disfigured by fear and sorrow, and Leah screamed, but no sound emerged. Just the whispering void urging her further into the nightmare. Locked in a dance of mindless panic, she found herself at the outskirts of town, an isolated hill overlooking Westfield, where the streetlights flickered weakly below like dying stars. It was there that a grim realization struck her. The townsfolk had not only turned against her, but they were also a part of this dark tapestry. Every vacant stair harbored a fragment of the curse that bound them, a collective ancient malevolence emanating from the roots of their existence. As she tried to breathe, she heard it, the echoing whispers crescendoing into a deafening roar of revelation. It wasn't mere madness she faced. It was her inheritance woven from generations of fear and darkness. Leah clutched her head as fragmented visions crashed into her consciousness. Violence, betrayal, blasphemy, and dark rituals. This was the price of their existence, one that claimed her as its latest vessel. The haunting culminated in a singular truth. To break the curse would mean embracing it, becoming the very horror she fought against. In anguish, Leah turned back toward the town, the pavement now alive beneath her feet, pulsing with a sickening heartbeat. The rain began again, trailing down her face like tears, but she no longer felt alone. She understood the whispers now. They were calling her home, beckoning her to step beyond the veil. As she descended into the shadowy embrace of her past, the finality of her choice punctuated the air with a chilling clarity. She was one with the darkness, a whisper among the myriad voices, and the town was now hers. With each step closer to the heart of Westfield, pain surrendered to an intoxicating power. The streetlights shimmered ominously, illuminating her path. The ghosts of her ancestors smiled, and together they wove triumph in macabre harmony. There would be no escape from this horror. Instead, Leah would welcome it, entwined with the very essence of the place that had birthed her. And as she crossed the threshold, the town embraced her as its own, a harbinger of darkness prepared to claim its next tale. The old lighthouse at the edge of Ravenswood Cliff stood defiant against the encroaching sea, its white paint peeling like the skin of a long-neglected corpse. Miranda had always stared at it as a child from a distance, generating stories in her mind about the lightkeeper lost to time and darkness. Now, at 32, she found herself back in her hometown, the prickling of her childhood imagination dulled by the weight of adult reality. Her car rattled as she parked on the crumbling gravel lot, and she shivered. A chill hung in the air, thick and oppressive, wrapping around her like a predatory embrace. As she stepped out, the salty gusts sliced through the fabric of her jacket, an unsettling taste drifting through her senses, reminiscent of something brainy, bordering on decay. Even from a distance, the lighthouse felt alive, breathing and pulsating with a malevolence that wrapped its tendrils around her mind. The locals whispered about it at the diner, their hushed tones rife with fear and curiosity. But Miranda had dismissed their warnings as folklore, relics of a childhood spent weaving elaborate tales fueled by her imagination. Now, with dusk setting in and the air thickening with the scent of impending rain, a gnawing fear began to burrow under her skin. The door to the lighthouse creaked ominously as she pushed it open, revealing a staircase spiraling upward into darkness. Her heart thudded, a grotesque rhythm in the stillness. She was searching for the truth, to confront the past that clawed at her insides like a hungry animal. Each step she took sent down vibrations through the old wood, their whispers echoing into dark corners where no light dared to enter. As she ascended, the air grew colder, a creeping chill wrapping around her spine, and she felt a shiver that was not entirely born of the bitter wind. Reaching the top, she stumbled into the lantern room, where shattered glass scattered like memories, too painful to recall. The light had once cast a warm beam across the stormy waters, a beacon of hope. Now it loomed like a gaping maw, a hollow space that felt as if it could swallow her whole. She noticed a journal bound in faded leather on the ground, its pages frail and yellowed. Curiosity disarmed her caution as she knelt to flip through it. The embossed letters of its title, Chronicles of the Abyss, sending a fresh wave of dread through her veins. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, recounting the descent into madness of the last lightkeeper. It spoke of inexplicable sounds reverberating through the cliffs, harbingers of despair, and glimpses of shadows that danced outside the lighthouse, just beyond the edge of sight. As she read, her breath grew shallow, the ink bleeding together, forming disturbing shapes that twisted in her mind, taking on a corporeal form. A chill crept up her legs, and she looked up, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon her. The air around her thickened as she stood to leave, a sudden gust of wind blasting through the room, slamming the shutters shut with a resonating bang. Miranda's heart raced as she fumbled for the door, its handle conspicuously cold and slick, reluctant to yield to her frantic pleas for freedom. The tempest outside surged, echoing the chaos building within her, a storm of burgeoning panic clashing with the primal urge to escape. The walls seemed to breathe, closing in around her, suffocating her with an overwhelming dread. Miranda's mind raced as she turned back, her thoughts spiraling into a frenzy. What if she was not alone? What if the entries in the journal were not merely the ravings of a lunatic, but warnings meant for her? The tremors of the lighthouse's history carved themselves into her consciousness as heavy thuds echoed from below, resembling footsteps she could scarcely comprehend. She stood frozen, grappling with the notion that perhaps the abyss had not only taken the last lightkeeper, but was hungry for more. Gathering her resolve, she shoved against the door, finally bursting through into the blustery evening. The world, outside transformed, the horizon obscured by swirling shadows, and the sea below clawed at the cliffs, incomprehensible and furious. Her sense of direction faltered. The path that once led to safety twisted into a labyrinthine nightmare, the landscape shifting as if the lighthouse was reshaping reality itself. Dread pulsed from the depths of her being, a singular, inescapable truth. She was now part of its tale. With an overbearing sense of urgency, she raced down the slippery steps and across the jagged rocks, glancing back at the lighthouse. Something glimmered from within its darkened depths, a beacon of malevolence sending shivers through her core. The shadows now moved with intent, swirling around her in dissonant laughter that scraped against her sanity. She stumbled, falling into the brine, the shocking cold reigniting primal instincts to survive. Yet a part of her felt undeniably tethered to the lighthouse, as if it held some dark fascination she couldn't escape. The water clawed at her, dense and suffocating, pulling her beneath the surface, and for a moment everything went silent. Yet beneath that silence a whisper echoed, a voice woven with despair, promising revelations, secrets too profound to comprehend. As she fought against the suffocating embrace of the sea, images of the Lightkeeper flickered in her mind, his hollow gaze pleading not for salvation but for companionship in the darkness. Miranda surfaced with desperation, gasping for air, her eyes blinking away droplets like tears. The lighthouse loomed ominously, its structure trembling as if responding to her struggles. But in that moment she glimpsed shadows on the cliffs, figures with hollow eyes and ghostly visages writhing closer, their laughter mingling with the sound of waves. The truth seeped through her consciousness like venom, and she understood. The lighthouse had chosen her, drawn her back to partake in its eternal cycle of madness. With adrenaline fueling her limbs, she scrambled up the rocky shoreline, but the air felt heavier, infused with the weight of uncountable souls. No longer did she seek to escape. The thrill of the horror danced tantalizingly in her veins. Everything blurred, time, space, until she found herself at the base of the lighthouse with a sudden realization crashing over her. There was no escape from the gaping maw of the abyss. The door swung open, calling her forth, promising answers, laced with darkness. As she stepped across the threshold, she felt the shadows embrace her, whispering secrets of eternity, ecstatic in the understanding that she was home. The community she had long abandoned, those who whispered of the lighthouse, those who feared its allure, now seemed like fractures of a life she had left behind, all mere phantoms against the overwhelming solitude of the abyss. The wind roared outside, a final exclamation from the world she once knew, drowning in the cacophony of laughter and the sound of waves crashing against stone. And as the door shut behind her with a sigh that felt both welcoming and suffocating, the lighthouse stood resolute once more, its light flickering ominously in the distance, a beacon, forever shrouded in darkness, welcoming the next lost soul lured by its insatiable call. Cora had always found comfort in the lulling rhythm of the ocean waves, but on that overcast morning, the beach felt alien. The waves crashed against the jagged rocks with a ferocity that sent a shiver down her spine, a sudden dip in the temperature wrapping itself around her like cold fingers. She wrapped her cardigan tighter, staring down the empty shore, questioning why she had come here alone, to this desolate island where the locals whispered warnings in hushed tones. A brief note from an old friend, riddled with half-explanations, and unnerving references to shadows waiting in the corners of their minds had stirred her curiosity. Now, an unsettling feeling gnawed at her insides. Something was wrong here, something that lurked beneath the calm facade. As she explored the island, intricate patterns emerged in the sand, tribal-like symbols that hinted at an ancient presence. Each step stirred up a subtle scent of salt and decay, a mixture that refused to dissipate. Cora's heart raced as she knelt, tracing her fingers over the crude etchings. A chill crept up her arms, and she could have sworn she felt eyes watching her, but no one was there. The air thickened around her, charged with an energy that was both foreign and familiar, a whisper of memories she couldn't quite grasp. She stood up abruptly, brushing off the sand, and continued onward, skirting the jagged cliffs that loomed over the shore like silent sentinels. The island stretched out before her, wild and untamed, a mix of dense woods and unforgiving rock. She stumbled upon a ruin, the remnants of what seemed to be a small settlement. Overgrown with vines and moss, the crumbling stone structures whispered tales of past lives. Cora's footsteps echoed against the hollow walls, and the eeriness gripped her with force. An unsettling quiet had fallen, as though the world held its breath in anticipation. She touched the walls, feeling the cool dampness seep into her skin, sending a jolt through her system. a moment of connection to those who had lived and feared here long before her. As daylight faded, a thick fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the island in a shroud of gray. The shadows grew longer, twisting into grotesque shapes that pranced just beyond her line of sight. Cora's unease deepened. She remembered the troubling tales her friend had mentioned about the island, of lights dancing in the night and siren, songs lulling sailors to their doom. Each haunting echo of her friend's voice vibrated in her mind, filling the void with dreadful anticipation. It wasn't just the physical space that felt haunted, it was her own psyche, unearthing, buried, fears and regrets. The island had awakened something within her, a quiet madness that threatened to surface. Caught off guard, she froze when a soft sound reached her ears, a melody floating delicately through the thick air. It was ethereal, almost beautiful, but it twisted her stomach with dread. The song seemed to beckon, weaving between trees and rocks, urging her deeper into the woods. Hesitant but curious, Cora followed the sound, each cautious step luring her further from safety. The woods closed, in around her, trunks twisted like gnarled fingers grasping at her as though to pull her into their depths. Night enveloped her, the fog thickening, suffocating. Suddenly the song faltered. Silence crashed down around her. Cora strained to detect even the faintest trace of sound, but the world held still, suspended between breaths. Panic surged through her, and she turned. The path behind her seemed to have vanished, erased. Only darkness remained, seeping into her thoughts, filling every inch of her with a creeping horror. She felt eyes upon her again, a cacophony of whispers weaving through the trees, as though the very earth beneath her was alive and watching. Frantic, Cora stumbled forward, her footsteps pounding against the ground like a hammer striking a bell, desperate to escape. Then she saw it. A flicker of light through the dense fog, a dim glow pulsing with a rhythmic cadence. Heart racing, she dashed toward it, believing it to be safety, a refuge. As she emerged from the thicket, the reality before her shattered her expectations. A small clearing opened up, illuminated by a mound of flickering candles surrounding a grotesque idol crafted from bone and twisted roots, the air thick with the smell of burning wax and something metallic and sharp. As she marveled at the idol, an overwhelming sense of wrongness engulfed her. She was not alone. Shadows darted around the clearing, flickers that coiled into the corners of her vision, seeking to draw her in. Just as she turned to run, the ground beneath her feet felt as though it breathed, pulsating. Faces emerged in the bark of the trees, contorted in expressions of anguish, their whispers rising in fervor. Her friend's face flashed in her mind, the warning again echoing, and she understood the ancient pact binding them to this island, the sacrifice of fear and despair to appease something far older than time. In her fight or flight response, every instinct urged her to flee, but the shadows began to reach for her, tendrils stretching out with rotten fingers grasping at her vulnerable body. Cora felt her feet move, not toward her escape, but toward the idol, the glow consuming her consciousness. The promise of understanding tugged deep within her, a horrific curiosity intermixed with hope that burned hotter than her fear. She stumbled, forward again, entranced, and all at once the shadows wrapped around her, pulling her into their cold grasp. Time lost meaning. As she stood trapped within that twisted embrace, she felt pieces of her mind unspooling like threads from a garment, memories and fears intertwining with the darkness. Paranoia slipped beneath her skin, and she became acutely aware of every heartbeat, every silent scream bitten back. The remaining light flickered, and with each blink, pieces of her were swallowed whole. As the whispers turned into a cacophony, a haunting clarity washed over her. She was no longer just a visitor. The island had claimed her, her spirit entwined with its history, bound to its cursed fate with no hope of return. Days slipped by outside the fog, and the island resumed its eternal cycle, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close to the truth buried deep within its shadows. The next letter would find its way to an unsuspecting friend, an invitation wrapped in cryptic messages, warning only of the elusive shadows begging to be freed. And Cora, once vibrant and curious, would now join the throng of whispers singing, to the winds, forever tethered to the horrors lurking beneath the surface. The island was silent again, but it was never alone. The rain beat down on the dilapidated town of Eldridge Hollow, an industrial relic from the early 1900s where few dared to tread. Rusted frames jutted from the ground like broken bones, and the air smelled of damp earth mixed with the metallic tinge of unseen machinery, remnants of a factory long abandoned. It was here that Jessie, a recent university dropout seeking purpose, wandered after hearing ghostly whispers in the local folklore. Despite the warnings from townsfolk about spirits trapped within the ruins, she felt an inexplicable pull to uncover their secrets, and her curiosity fanned the flames of a reckless bravery that simmered just beneath her anxious surface. As she stepped into the old textile mill, the door creaked ominously, echoing through the hollow emptiness like a mourning sigh. Dust motes danced in the fading light that filtered through shattered windows, casting an ethereal glow on the debris-strewn floor. Jessie's heartbeat quickened, not just from fear but from an unsettling thrill. She imagined the lives once lived here, the labor, the sweat. Yet, with each step, a shiver crawled over her skin, the air thickening as if the shadows were thickened by something lurking just beyond her vision. The deeper she ventured, the more distorted time felt, as if she were suspended in a forgotten moment. She navigated the tangle of machinery with her flashlight, its beam flickering sporadically like a nervous heartbeat. A chilling breeze whipped through the corridors, carrying a faint echo of laughter that seemed to reverberate off the metal walls, slicing through the unnerving silence. Was it just the wind or something more sinister? The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, but the promise of discovery pushed her forward, overriding her instinct to run. Then Jessie found the first clue, a small ornate mirror partially encased beneath a slab of concrete, its surface clouded over yet still reflective in nature. As she leaned closer, her breath fogged the outside, the faint outline of a face appearing behind her. Not hers, but a woman with hollow eyes and a malicious grin. She jerked back, heart racing, but the face vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving Jessie questioning her sanity. Gulping down rising panic, she pressed on, feeling the pressing weight of unseen eyes tracking her every move, pushing her deeper into the mill's bowels. As darkness enveloped her, Jessie stumbled upon a rusted control room devoid of life but overflowing with relics of operations long ceased. Old machinery rested like ancient giants caught in a perpetual slumber, while the walls were adorned with yellowing newspaper clippings detailing tragic accidents that claimed the lives of workers, tales written with a morbid fascination that chilled her bones. Jessie lingered on one particular headline, Eldridge Hollow's factory, a grave for hope. A cold sweat broke on her brow as she felt the whisper of history pulling her closer, each tale threaded with sorrow and echoing unfulfilled desires for freedom. A low hum began to resonate, reverberating through the room like a heartbeat awakening after years of stillness. Jessie stumbled back, a creeping dread washing over her, and the machinery flickered to life, gears clanking as if stirring from their long slumber. Yet, Instead of fear, Jessie felt an odd compulsion to approach. Against her better judgment, she leaned closer, entranced. In that moment, the surrounding darkness seemed to pulse and swirl, disorienting her senses, and for a brief, fragile instant, she felt the weight of the factory's tragic history pressing down upon her. With no clear memory of how long she stayed, time had warped, twisting hours into mere moments. A cascade of disjointed memories flashed through her mind, each horrific scene playing out in vivid, grotesque detail. The machinery clattering mercilessly, the screams of her predecessors echoing in cacophony, their faces twisted in anguish as they vanished from sight. Panic hammered inside her chest, and in a reckless act of defiance, she fled the control room, stumbling through the tangled maze of the mill, desperately trying to escape the endless cycle of the past. However, the factory seemed alive, morphing, with each frantic turn, guiding her deeper into its heart. Confounded by the constant shift of shadows and the unnerving sound of low, whimpering breaths that skittered through the silence, Jessie's mind spiraled into a panic, tearing at her sanity. It was a labyrinth, a cruel trick embedded in the walls that held her captive, chipping away at her resolve until she was no longer certain of her surroundings, nor if she even had any hope of escape. Then, Jessie stumbled upon an underground chamber, illuminated by a sickly green luminescence that pulsated like a heartbeat, the air stale and rancid. It was here she faced the culmination of her fears. Grotesque figures, half-formed and entangled in shadow, erupted from the darkness, their faces the haunting reflections of the past. She recognized each worker, their hollow eyes filled with unfulfilled longing, mouths stretching into agonized screams, pleading for release. With sheer terror, Jessie clutched her throat, each breath as sharp as broken glass, realization dawning upon her like a shrouded dawn. She had not merely unearthed the past, she had become entwined in it. A new thread woven into the fabric of this dark tapestry. The factory needed her, just as it needed the souls before her. Their spirits fused into the machinery, feeding off their anguish, and now thirsting for her essence as well. She was a part of its history, forever bound to the shadows. Dread filled her mind, but the escape route lay behind her, a horizon shrouded in horror while the figures advanced, their screams a sinister chorus beckoning for her to join their ranks. Everything morphed into chaos as Jessie turned to flee, but every direction felt like a step deeper into despair, the factory's heart beating like a dark clock counting down her last moments of freedom. The walls echoed her pounding pulse, rhythmically, thudding like the drums of war. Finally, in one last desperate act, she stumbled toward the stairwell, but instead of leading her back to the world above, it spiraled downwards, deeper into the earth, a maw hungry for its latest offering. The laughter returned, weaving through her mind, taunting her as panic gripped her heart. With each passing moment, she became more aware that the factory was not merely a relic. It was an entity, a Sanka, feeding on fear and despair. When Jessie emerged on a lower level, the air was thick and suffocating, the darkness reeking of rust and decay. The figures converged around her, their faces shifting, twisting into an amalgamation of grief and rage, yet beneath it all, a glimmer of hope still flickered. If she could confront the sorrow, perhaps she could break the cycle. Clenching her fists, she stood firm, the echoes of their past drowning out her fears, urging her to name the suffering aloud. The chamber trembled, the walls shuddering like a living creature, and the unearthly laughter escalated into screams of anguish, merging into a cacophony of despair that threatened to consume her. In that moment, Jessie understood the weight of their sorrow. It was a curse desperate for closure. Gripping the mirror tightly, she met her reflection, her own face morphing into those who had suffered before her. With a shout born of raw emotion, she released their stories into the cavernous expanse, a dam breaking, her courage cascading into the shadows. As bitter screams echoed through the chamber, Jessie felt their anguish release, a wave crashing against the walls until suddenly silence enveloped her, heavy and thick. The figures began to dissipate, their faces calming as if a long-held breath was finally released. The machinery rattled harmlessly, the oppressive weight lifting gently as Jessie unwound the chains of history. Yet paradoxically, emptiness wrapped around her, a cold loneliness settling in the wake of liberation. Standing alone in the echoing silence of the mill, Jessie realized the chest of sorrow had opened, unleashing its spirits into nothingness. But in their absence, she was consumed by a gnawing dread. Had she freed them, or merely seized their place? As the remnants of the past faded into obscurity, a hollow echo lingered. She knew all too well that somewhere in the recesses of that dark factory, shadows still danced, listening, waiting for the next soul burdened by curiosity to wander too close. And as Jessie turned to leave, the darkness murmured promises made, not in freedom but in eternal watchfulness, reminding her that some stories once unearthed could never truly end.